A black man is harassed and handcuffed in front of his daughter until he flashes a badge that silences the entire department. But what happens next sparks national change. On a crisp Sunday evening, Jonathan Reed returned from his usual grocery run. Dressed in dark jeans and a fitted sweatshirt, he carried 2 paper bags filled with food for his kids. He had just finished his shift as an IT specialist and was looking forward to a quiet dinner with his family. As he stepped onto his driveway in Crestwood Meadows, a predominantly white, upper-class neighborhood, he noticed 2 squad cars creeping behind him. Jonathan furrowed his brows. This wasn't new. He'd lived here for over 2 years, yet still got the looks. But tonight felt different. As he pulled his keys out and approached his door, one officer stepped out and shouted, "Hey, step away from that house." Startled, Jonathan turned around. "I live here," he said calmly, holding up his key. But the second cop had already drawn his taser. "Don't move." Within seconds, both officers, Officer Mitchell and Officer Barnes, had him pinned to the ground, face against the cold concrete, groceries spilled beside him. "We got a possible break-in suspect," one said over the radio. Jonathan kept repeating, "Check the mailbox, check the deed. I live here." Neighbors began peeking through their blinds. One woman even recorded the entire thing from her upstairs window. Meanwhile, inside the house, Jonathan's 8-year-old daughter, Emily, stood frozen by the window, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy," she called out, "why are the police hurting Daddy?" That one question would set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Because Jonathan wasn't just another black man living in a white suburb. He was about to remind the town, and the nation, who he really was. Emily's tiny voice echoed through the hall. "Mommy, they're hurting Daddy." Her mother, Samantha Reed, dropped the mixing spoon in her hand and ran toward the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. Her husband Jonathan, face down on their own driveway, handcuffed by 2 officers like a common criminal. Without a second thought, Samantha yanked open the front door and stormed outside. "What the hell is going on? That's my husband. He lives here." Officer Mitchell didn't even glance at her. "Ma'am, please stay back. We're handling a possible burglary." Samantha snapped. "Burglary? That's our car in the driveway. That's our porch. You think he's breaking into his own house?" The officers didn't flinch. "We got a report from a neighbor about a suspicious male loitering around the property." Jonathan turned his head slowly toward Samantha, his cheeks scraped from the pavement. "Call Charles," he muttered. "Call him now." Samantha's eyes widened. She knew exactly who he meant. Charles Langford was Jonathan's best friend, and also the head of the Civilian Oversight Police Board for the entire county. As Samantha rushed inside to grab her phone, Emily stood silently by the window, clinging to her teddy bear. Across the street, a nosy neighbor named Mrs. Connolly watched through binoculars. It was her call that brought the police here, and she wasn't ashamed of it, yet. Moments later, Samantha was on the phone. "Charles, it's Sam. They've got John in cuffs. In our driveway." Charles didn't waste a second. "I'll handle it. Don't say anything else to them." Back outside, the tension thickened. One officer began walking Jonathan to the squad car. But what they didn't know was that this so-called suspect had just triggered a storm far beyond their control, and it was only beginning. As Officer Mitchell shoved Jonathan into the back seat of the cruiser, his partner, Officer Reynolds, glanced at him, slightly uneasy. "Something doesn't feel right about this," he muttered under his breath. Mitchell scoffed. "We followed protocol. Suspicious person, possible break-in. Doesn't matter what he says." But his wife came out. She confirmed his name. The kid called him Daddy. "You really think a burglar's playing house in broad daylight?" Before Mitchell could answer, a sleek black SUV screeched to a halt in front of the house. Out stepped Charles Langford, sharp suit, calm demeanor, but eyes burning with restrained fury. The officers didn't recognize him at first, but Jonathan, even from the back seat, managed a small smile. "Told you he'd come." Charles approached with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. "Which one of you is in charge here?" he demanded. Mitchell straightened up, trying to assert control. "Sir, this is an active police situation." "No, it's not," Charles cut in. "This man is Jonathan Reed, homeowner, U.S. Air Force veteran, software engineer, and more importantly, someone I've known for 15 years. Now, explain to me why he's in cuffs." Reynolds looked stunned. "Wait, Charles Langford? As in Oversight Board Langford?" Mitchell's face paled slightly. "Sir, we had a call from a neighbor. I don't care if you had a call from the president, Charles snapped. Did you ask for ID? Did you check the property records? Did you even bother to look at the family photos visible from the window? Or was black man equals criminal the only calculation that mattered? The question hung in the air like smoke. From inside the house, Samantha held her daughter close, watching as Charles took over. And across the street, Mrs. Connolly lowered her binoculars for the first time, her smug expression giving way to something else, doubt. It was only the beginning of accountability. Officer Reynolds stood stiffly, his jaw tightening as Charles Langford's words continued to echo in the humid afternoon air. Across the street, a small group of neighbors had gathered. Some whispered, others recorded with their phones. This wasn't just a neighborhood incident anymore, it was becoming public. Charles stepped closer to the cruiser, speaking directly to Mitchell now. Take the cuffs off. Now. Mitchell hesitated, visibly wrestling with the command. Mr. Langford, I understand your position, but this is a field investigation. We need to what? Charles interrupted, his voice low and sharp. Fabricate more charges. Protect your pride. You know what I see. A man arrested outside his own house, in front of his wife and daughter, without any probable cause, because you were afraid. Mitchell finally relented, if only because of the growing number of eyes on them. He fumbled with the keys and unlocked Jonathan's cuffs. As Jonathan stepped out of the cruiser, he rolled his wrists and looked Mitchell square in the eyes. You could have asked. I would have told you everything you needed to know, but you didn't want answers. You wanted control. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Reed, I'm sorry, it's protocol sometimes. We're trained to what? Assume guilt based on skin color? Jonathan asked, not with rage, but with something heavier, disappointment. I served this country. I built this house. I pay taxes. And still, I'm treated like a threat on my own front porch. Charles turned to Samantha. Are you all right? She nodded, but her eyes were red. Our daughter was watching. That one line struck harder than anything else. A child had just seen her father arrested without reason, and she would remember it. Charles took out his phone and made a call. Get Internal Affairs and Legal on the line. I want body cam footage pulled, every dispatch call logged, and their precinct supervisor present within the hour. He hung up and looked back at the officers. This isn't over, and it wasn't, not by a long shot. Back inside their home, Jonathan sat on the edge of the couch, still processing everything. Samantha brought him a glass of water with trembling hands. Their daughter, Aria, peeked timidly from the hallway, eyes wide and confused. Daddy, did you do something wrong? She asked softly. Jonathan looked up, heartbroken. No, baby. Sometimes people make bad decisions because they don't understand others who look different. But I didn't do anything wrong. Meanwhile, outside, Officer Reynolds and Mitchell stood awkwardly by their cruiser. Their radios crackled, but neither one reached for it. They knew they'd gone too far, and now they'd been caught doing it on camera. Within the hour, a sleek black SUV pulled up. Out stepped a woman in a sharp grey suit and badge necklace. Jessica Holmes, Internal Affairs. Gentlemen, she said coolly. Body cams. Now. Mitchell gulped and handed over his device. Reynolds did the same, noticeably paler. Jessica entered the house with Charles Langford, who now wore the same commanding expression he did when addressing the boardroom of Langford Securities. Jonathan, he said, this is Jessica Holmes. She'll be reviewing everything. Jessica shook Jonathan's hand. I'm sorry this happened to you. It shouldn't have. My job is to make sure it doesn't happen again. Jonathan's anger had softened into a heavy fatigue. I just want my daughter to grow up in a world where this isn't normal. Jessica nodded. And we're going to do everything we can to make that happen. Outside, more media had arrived, tipped off by bystanders' video uploads already gaining traction online. Under the hashtag #ArrestedAtHome, Samantha stood at the window, holding Aria close. They never expected this to go beyond today, she whispered. Jonathan looked at his family, then back toward the flashing red and blue lights on their own street. But now, he said quietly, everyone's watching. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the neighborhood buzzed, not with sirens, but with cell phones. Videos of Jonathan's arrest had already spread like wildfire. One video, posted by a teenage neighbor, had surpassed 2 million views in less than 6 hours. The title was blunt and damning. Black man arrested for entering his own home. Watch his daughter cry. News outlets caught wind quickly. Reporters gathered outside Jonathan's house, mics in hand, asking for statements. But Jonathan remained inside, his arm wrapped protectively around Aria as Samantha fielded calls and texts from friends, family, and even strangers. Meanwhile, at police headquarters, the bodycam footage was being reviewed by Jessica Holmes and her internal team. The footage was undeniable, Jonathan calmly stating his address. Officer Reynolds brushing off his ID, Mitchell tightening the cuffs despite no resistance. Jessica sat back in her chair, disgusted. They never even asked dispatch to confirm ownership of the home, she said to her assistant. This wasn't just poor judgment, this was profiling, pure and simple. In another part of the city, Police Chief Alan Briggs was watching the same footage, this time on the evening news. His jaw clenched as the reporter narrated, Jonathan Miller, a respected software engineer and father, was tackled and handcuffed outside his own home in Brookside Hills. According to internal sources, both officers failed to follow standard verification procedures. The backlash was swift. Protesters gathered outside the precinct. A petition demanding disciplinary action racked up 75,000 signatures in 2 hours. Influencers, athletes, and even celebrities reposted the video. The moment had struck a nerve. Inside his living room, Jonathan stared at the television in disbelief. His private humiliation had become public outcry. Samantha placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you ready for this?" she asked gently. Jonathan exhaled. "I think the world is finally ready to listen." The next morning, Brookside Hills felt like a city on edge. Local media vans were parked along Jonathan's street. Protesters lined the sidewalk holding signs that read, "Walking while black isn't a crime and accountability now." Helicopters hovered overhead, capturing aerial shots of the scene. Inside the Miller home, it was quiet, but tense. Aria clutched a stuffed animal as she watched cartoons, her eyes flickering every time a loud voice came from the street. Samantha was on her phone non-stop, coordinating with legal representatives, journalists, and civil rights advocates who had offered their support overnight. Jonathan had barely slept. Instead, he sat at the dining table, staring at the now viral video looping on his screen. He couldn't stop replaying the moment Officer Reynolds shoved him against the brick pillar, the cold steel of handcuffs biting into his wrists, the fear in Aria's voice. The doorbell rang. Standing at the door was Amelia Grant, a renowned civil rights attorney. "You've been flooded with offers, I know," she said. "But I'm not just here to represent you. I'm here because this is bigger than one man's arrest. This is about a system." Jonathan studied her eyes, steady, determined. "All right," he said. "Let's do this." Across town, Officer Mitchell sat alone in his apartment, his phone buzzing with missed calls. He'd been placed on administrative leave, and his name was now trending for all the wrong reasons. Reynolds wasn't faring much better. Videos of his past encounters were now under scrutiny too. At City Hall, the mayor was being briefed. "This is spiraling," one aide said. "You need to get in front of this." "No," the mayor replied. "We need to listen first." That afternoon, a press conference was announced. The entire city was watching. Jonathan stood behind the podium, cameras flashing, microphones inches from his face. "My name is Jonathan Miller," he began, "and I was arrested in front of my daughter for being black and going home." The crowd went silent. Then the applause began. Mayor Evelyn Burke sat in her office, flanked by her press secretary and chief of staff, watching Jonathan's speech play on the monitor. Every line was searing. Every pause echoed louder than the last. Outside the window, protesters circled City Hall with signs reading, "We are not a threat and fire Reynolds now." "We're running out of time," her chief of staff warned. "The longer we hesitate, the more this city fractures." Mayor Burke, a moderate who had always tried to walk the line, now found herself staring at a canyon. She had known Officer Reynolds's name before, not for heroism, but for internal complaints. She had let it slide. That decision now sat heavy on her chest. "We need to act," she finally said. She called a citywide town hall meeting for the next evening. Invitations were sent to community leaders, legal experts, police oversight boards, and Jonathan himself. Meanwhile, Samantha was preparing their family. The world knew their names now. The footage had gone international. Journalists from The Guardian, CNN, and Al Jazeera requested interviews. Aria's school had offered to send a counselor. A local bookstore offered to start a college fund for her. Jonathan, still processing the whirlwind, asked Samantha, "Do we go to the town hall?" She nodded. "Not just go, we lead it." Across town, Officer Reynolds sat alone in a bar, nursing a drink while staring at the breaking news on TV. Brookside Hills Police Department faces civil rights probe. His hands shook as he reached for his phone. He called Mitchell. "We need to get ahead of this," he said. But Mitchell didn't answer. He had already been contacted by an attorney. An offer was on the table, immunity in exchange for testimony, and Mitchell, terrified of losing everything, was starting to think that Reynolds wasn't worth protecting. Back at the Miller home, Jonathan looked out the window as more neighbors placed signs in their yards. "We stand with Jonathan." For the first time in days, he felt something different in his chest. Not fear. Hope. Brookside Hills Community Center hadn't seen a crowd this size in decades. By 6:45 p.m., it was standing room only. Reporters lined the back wall. Activists occupied the front rows. Police officers in plain clothes sat scattered throughout the audience, their body language stiff, guarded. At 7 p.m. sharp, Mayor Evelyn Burke stepped onto the stage flanked by city officials, including Police Chief Harold Sims, a man with decades of service and a reputation for towing the line. But tonight, even his badge looked like it weighed too much. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Jonathan Miller walked to the microphone. He wore the same navy blue suit he had worn to court. He didn't need a tie or a podium. His presence alone silenced the room. "My name is Jonathan Miller. I am a federal agent. I am also a father, a husband, a son, and a black man who was harassed, detained, and humiliated by an officer who didn't ask questions because he thought he didn't have to." Murmurs rippled through the audience. "This isn't about my badge. It's about what would have happened if I didn't have it." Samantha sat in the front row holding Aria's hand, pride and pain swimming in her eyes. Jonathan went on to describe the encounter, word for word. No embellishments, just truth. And then he said, "You can't reform silence. You can't retrain a system that protects itself before protecting its people. If Officer Reynolds isn't held accountable, not just by policy but by law, then this city is saying his actions are acceptable." Gasps, then applause, then a standing ovation. Mayor Burke leaned to the mic, her face grave. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. This city owes you more than apologies. It owes you action." Chief Sims followed, his voice heavier. "Officer Reynolds is under formal investigation. Effective immediately, he is suspended without pay. Internal Affairs has also launched a department-wide audit of racial profiling cases from the past 5 years." Cameras flashed. Reporters sprinted outside to file their stories. Backstage, a legal observer from the state's Civil Rights Commission nodded to Jonathan. "We'll be in touch. This case has legs." Outside, people chanted his name, not as a hero, but as a mirror. He had made the system look at itself. But Jonathan wasn't interested in fame. He just wanted justice to be more than a word tossed around during election years. And now, it looked like justice was starting to listen. 3 weeks had passed since the town hall, but its impact still reverberated across Brookside Hills. The video of Jonathan Miller's calm, commanding speech had gone viral, shared by civil rights leaders, law students, and even sitting senators. The words, "If I didn't have a badge, I might not have made it home," became a rallying cry nationwide. Officer Reynolds had been officially terminated following the Internal Affairs investigation. It revealed not only his misconduct with Jonathan, but also a troubling pattern of racial profiling over the past 4 years. Complaints swept under the rug, warnings ignored. But Jonathan's case didn't end there. With pressure mounting from the public and national watchdogs, the Department of Justice launched a broader inquiry into the Brookside Hills Police Department. 2 captains quietly resigned, and a policy overhaul began with community advocates, including Jonathan, brought in as consultants. Jonathan didn't want vengeance. He wanted systems that didn't depend on luck or a badge to treat someone like a human being. Samantha and Aria, once shaken, now stood taller. Aria, too young to fully understand, still pointed at the TV when Jonathan appeared and said, "That's my daddy. He stopped the bad man." He had, but he'd done more than that. He'd exposed how fragile fairness could be when left unguarded. One morning, Jonathan received an envelope. Inside was a letter on official DOJ letterhead. "Mr. Miller, your experience is now part of our federal training curriculum for law enforcement across the country. Thank you for reminding us that accountability is not optional, it is essential." He closed the letter, staring out the window. This wasn't how he imagined making history, but maybe history needed a wake-up call. And if that meant enduring one moment of disrespect to protect generations to come, then it was worth it. Jonathan turned to Arya, scooped her into his arms and smiled. "Let's go get pancakes, baby girl. Daddy's got a free morning. Justice can wait for a few hours." She giggled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Can I wear my FBI badge too?" He laughed. "Only if you promise to be fair." And just like that, the man who had been harassed for looking like a suspect walked into the world a symbol of hope. If you believe accountability starts with standing up, not backing down, like, comment, and share this story. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where truth always wins.